Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at Book 4, Chapter 24 of De Bello Gallico. Now this is focused on the invasion of Britain. So we've been talking about the Gallic Wars so far. And remember, they go from about 58 to 50 BCE. And while we were talking in the first book about the Helvetii and sort of Caesar's move into Gaul, now we've progressed further in the story where he's actually already conquered most of Gaul and he's going to set his sights on Britain. So if you want to get the history of that or read more about it, feel free to go and read the books in between this. The reason I jumped is I'm just following the AP Latin curriculum. But there is some good stuff in there. Feel free to read it on your own. You probably enjoy it. But where we are now is in 55 BCE in the invasion of Britain. So roughly speaking, this map is just like a Wikipedia map, but it gives you a sense of where Caesar has gone. And you'll notice that the parts in pink are where he's kind of gone, fought, conquered, things like that. There is still a region of Gaul in the middle that he hasn't really taken over. And we'll talk more about how this all kind of gets conquered at some point. But you'll notice to the east, the right of this map, he has ventured up to Germany, right? And at this point, he had even built a bridge across the Rhine River, marched into Germany to, in his words, fill the Germans with terror. And his campaign is going really, really well, okay? But now that he's here and he's conquered a lot of Gaul, his campaigns in northern Gaul have been kind of some of the toughest fighting. And one of the things that he's realized is that there's been aid coming from Britain, right? The people living on the British Isles. So he's heard about Britain. The island of Britannia is this mysterious place. The Romans really don't know too much about it. There's sort of rumors there might be sort of riches there, stuff to have. But one way or another, the campaign into Britain is really going to be a big public relations boost for Caesar. Not that he needs any more, but he's always looking for that opportunity. Because to the Romans, right, the average Roman, hearing about Britannia would be a place they'd maybe heard of, maybe not even heard of, and it would be so mysterious and out there they'd really have no context for what's going on. So Caesar can go across the English Channel and land on the island and do some damage, conquer, whatever. This would be a huge PR boost to him, which is part of the reason why he goes in there, right? There is a PR hit, and on top of that, militarily, there is a reason to try to stop them sending aid across the English Channel when he's trying to conquer Gaul. So there's a couple of different reasons there. So in this chapter, we actually start right in the middle of it. So Caesar has already created a fleet. It's 80 ships, and he's crossed the English Channel with 2 legions, which is not a lot, right? So he doesn't bring a full army. It's more like an expeditionary force, you might say. But he's not there to conquer the island. It's more to just kind of see what's going on, do some reconnaissance, things like that, send a message. And again, the PR sort of campaign of it. So when he gets there, though, what he's looking at, this region is the cliffs of Dover. So there's big, if you've never seen it before, I'd encourage you to look up big like rock walls where the Britons are basically standing on top of the cliffs and watching Caesar. They know he's coming. They've heard of his arrival, and they're just shadowing him, not letting him land. Okay, so the invasion was supposed to be a little bit easier. You're going to see even in Caesar's words, he thought it would go a different way. But the Britons just aren't willing to allow an invasion to occur unopposed. And that's where the narrative stops. He has to kind of divert his navy carrying his army about, I think it's somewhere between 7 and 10 miles away from that place until he can finally find a place to land. And you're going to see here that the native Britons are not going to let that happen, or they're at least going to oppose him from doing this. Okay, so the narrative starts like this. You have at barbari, concilio Romanorum cognito praemisso equitatu et esse dariis, quo plerumque genere in proliis uti consuerunt, reliquis copiis subsecuti nostros naubus egredi prohibebant. Okay, so there's a very long line here, but it starts by talking about the barbari, right? The barbarians, which is talking about the sort of local British tribes. Okay, so here we see they already know the Romans are coming. You have the ablative of absolutes. You have concilio cognito, right, with the sort of the plan of the Romans having been known, or having known the plan of the Romans, right? Romanorum is your genitive there. And then you have a second ablative of absolute. You have praemisso equitatu et esse daries. And with the cavalry, the equitatu, and the esse daries, the charioteers, having been sent out, right? Praemisso, having been sent forth or sent out. So they know the Romans are coming. That's kind of, and remember, the ablative of absolute kind of gives you that background information without disrupting the main narrative. So they know the Romans are coming, and they've already sent out their cavalry and chariots. So that's an important thing to realize. The British, right, or the British tribes, I'll just call them the Britons for this. There are different names for them. But they've shown up with cavalry. Caesar does not have any cavalry, right? He only has foot soldiers, and that's going to be part of the problem here, okay? Because it feels like he really wasn't expecting this much resistance to his landing, and he's trying to get his guys onto the shore. So they've sent these out. Then you have the quo plerumque. So the quo genere is sort of like which kind. Plerum means generally. So generally, like of which kind generally in battles in proliis, consuerunt uti, they were accustomed to use, meaning the British usually use chariots, right? The charioteers and the cavalry. Okay. Then you have reliquis copiis subsecuti. So having followed subsecuti with the rest of their troops, reliquis copiis, right? They prohibebant, they were prohibiting or preventing nostros. Now, when Caesar says nostros here, it means our, it really means our men, is what he's talking about, his soldiers. So our soldiers, egredi, he was preventing them from departing, egredi, they were stopping them to depart, you might say, or preventing them from departing naubus, from the ships. So in other words, the British have showed up, they've been shadowing the Romans on their landing, now they get down to the beach and they're not letting the Romans off their ships, which is a major problem. And there's some interesting sort of pieces in this first line. So one, Caesar knows that the British already knew he was there. So they have sort of better reconnaissance than he does necessarily. And he's also mentioning something interesting. He says the kind of which they generally use in battle. Caesar didn't know a lot about the British tribes. So he has sent spies out to try to gather information. He's been hearing things. But you could also kind of interpret this that he's saying this after the fact. So remember, he's already probably fought the British at this point. He's come back to the mainland and now he's writing his narrative. So he mentions, oh yeah, they usually use this. He didn't know that necessarily when he showed up. He probably had heard that they had chariots, but it's kind of an interesting after the fact sort of thing. But again, the idea here is they can't get off the boats. Okay. Then you have erat abhas causa summa difficultas quod naves propter magnitudinem nisi in alto constitui non poterat militibus autem ignotis locis impeditis manibus . So this is going to be a major sort of sentence. So I'm going to break into pieces. Okay, but we can start with it. You're saying there was, or he's saying there was, on account of these reasons, right? Abhas causas, rather, the greatest difficulty, meaning that there's a lot of trouble here. Okay, because the ships, on account of their size, they were not able to be stopped, like really to be, like landed, you might say, or stopped or anchored, unless in deep water. Okay, so in other words, they can't get the ships up to the shore. They have a problem here, right? It's very shallow. And then you have something about the militibus, the soldiers, okay? So let's just hold on to that for a second because it'll make more sense as we go into the next part of the line. But you're saying, however, something about the soldiers. Then you have a couple phrases here. So ignotis locis, in unknown places, meaning they don't know where they're going on. And impeditis manibus, with their hands restricted. Okay, so the soldiers have restricted hands. They can't really move a lot. They don't know where they are. And now we transition into the rest of the line. You have magno et gravi honore armorum oppressis simul et de navibus desiliendum et influctibus consistendum et cum hostibus erat pugnandum. Okay, and then it actually continues further. Okay. So, and with a great and heavy, magno et gravi, a great and heavy burden, honore, of arms, the soldiers oppressis, they were overcome, right? Having been pressed or overcome by this great and heavy burden of arms, right? Meaning they're kind of getting like pushed and squished together here. Okay. And they're all trying to get off the boat, right? So they're all kind of weighed down and trying to get off these boats. So then you have this phrase, these couple of phrases here, which is a passive periphrastic, right? So you have the gerund and you have the verb esse is implied here. So you have desiliendum, you have consistendum, and you have pugnandum. So all these, you're implying the word erat, which actually happens with erat pugnandum. So you could translate it as like they had to do something. So desiliendum, you could say they had to jump down. And consistendum, they had to stand in the waves, right, in the water. And again, stand kind of implies like not only standing up, but making a stand, like they're trying to like move as a military formation in the water. And they had to fight, pugnandum, with the enemy. So in all these sort of circumstances, none of these are good for his foot soldiers, okay? And that's why you're saying, why he mentions they're in an unknown place, their hands are restricted, and it's not going well. This is the greatest difficulty, right? And it's why they're all crushed together and things just aren't going well. Then we transition to the rest of the line. You have cum illi aut ex arido aut paulum in aquam progressi omnibus membris expeditis notissimis locis audacter tela coicerum et equos insui factos incitare. So when illi, meaning they, like the barbarians, okay, is who it's talking about. Meaning those guys over there, right? He's not talking about his own troops. But he's saying when they, either from dry land, ex arido, or paulum, a little, progressi paulum, having progressed, there's your deponent, perfect passive participle, right? Your participle, there's progressi. So having progressed a little into the water, meaning the Britons were either on dry land or they only had to go a little bit into the water. Okay. And you have the ablative absolute. They have omnibus membris expeditis, right? So with all their limbs, right, their arms basically unimpeded, you could translate expeditis. So in other words, the Romans are stuck together and can't move their arms. They're all like sardines. The Britons, on the other hand, are either on dry land or only a little bit of water, and their limbs are all free, right? And they're in notissimis locis, in very known places, okay? Meaning they know these lands very well. This is the opposite of the ignotis locis, right? The unknown places, and the impeditis manibus, right? The restricted hands of the Roman soldiers. So it's kind of an interesting back and forth happening here. So the Britons, they know where they are, and they have their arms free to fight, right? And they're not really in the water. So what do? They koikerent, they threw, right? Boldly audacter. They boldly threw tela, they threw their weapons. And they incitarent, right? You have these subjunctives here, right? So you have the imperfect here. They incitarent, they urged on their horses, and their horses are described as insuefactos, which you can translate as experienced, but it more means something like, maybe experienced is a good way to do it, but it also means like accustomed to it. So in other words, the horses are accustomed to fighting on this land, right? They're okay going in the water. They're not freaking out. They're okay with this style of fighting. They're almost trained is the idea. Okay, so everything is kind of counterbalanced. So the Romans are packed tightly, they can't move. The Britons are free and can move. The Romans are stuck in the water. The Britons are on the dry land. The Romans don't know where they are. The Britons do know where they are, and everything's trained. It's kind of giving you the opposites of how the Romans are in a really tight spot here, and they're not going to do very well. And on top of that, you have Roman legions, which are foot soldiers, fighting in like a beach landing against cavalry. It's just not ideal. Okay. Then it continues. You have quibus rebus nostri per teriti atque huius omnino generis pugnae imperiti, non eadem alacritate ac studio quo in pedestribus uti proeliis consuerant utebantur. So by which matters or by which affairs, right? Our men were terrified, nostri per teriti, right? And again, the nostri is talking about our soldiers, our men. They're per teriti, they're terrified. And not only that, they're imperiti. Here's the other word describing the men. They're unskilled, and it's omnino imperiti. So altogether unskilled of this kind, huius generis, this kind of fighting, pugnae, this kind of warfare. So in other words, he's saying that the Roman legions are not trained or skilled in a beach landing against cavalry when they're up to their waist in water. Like none of this is really good. So the men are terrified and they're not skilled. And if there's one thing you learn about the Roman army, their discipline and training is what makes them an effective fighting force. So when they're not actually disciplined or trained to do something, it's just not going to end well. I keep saying it, but it's not going to go well. Okay, and Caesar tells you that. Then you have non eadem alacritate, right? So this whole phrase kind of is set up from utebanto right at the very end, right? They were using, okay? And it's non utebantor. So they were not using the same eagerness, you could say, alacritate, or sort of sometimes translated as zeal, right? That could kind of work too, studio. So they're not really eager or prepared for this fight, you might say, the alacritate or the studio, right? So they're not using the same eagerness or the same zeal in which, right, you have the in quote, in which consuerant, they had been accustomed, uti, to using or to use in pedestribus proeliis, in battles on foot. Okay, so he's saying that the Roman legions are not using the same sort of skill and zeal and sort of eagerness to fight that they would have used if they had, or that they're usually used when they're accustomed to fighting pedestribus on foot, right? So again, it's hitting on that idea that they're just not ready for this, they're not prepared, and it's kind of a disaster, the attempted beach landing. Okay, so that ends chapter 24. It's pretty, an interesting point to pick up the narrative where you're really seeing them land on the beach, particularly because you're seeing Caesar struggle. And if you go back and look at the rest of the intervening chapters here, read them in English, he doesn't always tell you that he struggled, right? If he loses a battle, it's always, well, we lost 10 men, right? It's like, how's that possible? But here he's openly acknowledging like it's not really going well. He's giving you some of the reasons why, which is interesting to think about. So if you want to see some visuals of it, this is just a drawing I found, but it gives you the idea. And you can see the Romans trying to get off the boats, the cavalry of the British tribesmen coming, right? And it's not what Caesar had in mind. Okay, he really doesn't have enough troops to pull this off. So a lot of modern historians, I was trying to look up where Caesar landed. And I remember reading about Kent, and he probably didn't land there. One area that has been kind of pegged as an idea, and pardon the pun there, is Pegwell Bay, right? This area that's just sort of, I believe, to the east, northeast, but a little ways away from sort of Kent. And it's a shallow area. And I believe when I was looking it up, they said that they'd found remains of an old Roman fort there. So it seems like somewhere along this line is where Caesar landed. But even if this isn't the exact spot, it can give you an idea of what he probably was facing. So if you look in the background here, you can see the cliffs, right? That would have been probably what he'd seen along a lot of the coastline, right? And you can imagine the horsemen of the Britons just watching him, saying like, what is this invader doing? Where's he going to land? And when he comes down here, you can see where it would be hard to get boats there, right? Because it's shallow enough for horses to run around and cause havoc, and for the men on foot to really struggle to get out of that water. So it would definitely present a logistical problem for Caesar, and just a tactical disadvantage that he usually doesn't put himself in. Okay, so just some questions to think about. Not that there's a ton to really work through, and we've kind of covered a lot, but pay close attention, right, to how he's describing this opening battle, and whether or not the Romans are fighting well, and how he describes and how you know that this isn't really going well for them. Some reasons Caesar gave for why the Romans struggle, right? We talked about it, but think about it. Like, what does he say are the reasons? He doesn't say that the Britons are better fighters. He really puts it on the circumstances, right? If we had been here, we would have done better, is kind of the implication, right? We weren't used to fighting here. But the question you should ask is, if the Romans weren't used to fighting here, why did you do it, right? Why did you land here? Why did you allow this to happen? And why did you bring a force that wasn't ready for a beach landing, right? There's some questions that could be raised there. Another thing, the strength of his legion, right? What does he say it is? And does the situation suit that strength? He says it's fighting on foot. That's not really a good time when you're fighting waist deep in water, right? So again, the question is, or you should ask, is why did Caesar put his men in this position? Okay, and we're only at the beginning of this landing. There's more to the story, and you're going to see how it really goes off the rails for the Romans here. If you have any questions at all, feel free to put them in the comments below. I'm happy to help you out. Otherwise, keep at it. I say this in my other videos, but when you work through anything, Caesar included, if you want to pick a chapter, try the read and reread method, right? So read through it once, write down any problem areas you have, look them up, and then try to read it a second, third, fourth time, as many times as you need to, until you can get through this without needing too much vocab help and it makes sense to you. Okay, that's a good sign that you understand what's going on. Good luck with it.